All right, my presentation will be more historical than the ones we heard previously, I think. In the Declaration of Human Rights, of Rights of Man and Citizen from 1789, Article 11 reads, "The free communication of thoughts and opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Every citizen may therefore speak, write, and print freely if he respects his own responsibility for any abuse of this liberty in the cases set by the law." This idea and this formulation, this wording, became very influential in Europe in the following decades, often combined with a sentence from the Belgian Constitution of 1831, specifying that no censorship could ever be re-established. For instance, in the German Constitution of 1849, Article 143 reads, "Every German has the right to express his opinion freely in speech, writing, print, and pictures. Freedom of the press may, under no circumstances and in no way, be suspended or abolished by preventive measures such as censorship." Similar wording can be found in virtually all of the new constitutions that came into being in Europe in the 19th century, especially after the many revolutions in 1848. This does not mean, of course, that censorship was abolished overnight in 1848. It was a long struggle that went forth and back throughout the 19th century. For example, prior censorship of satirical cartoons only ended in France in 1881. And in all European countries, post-publication censorship continued in the form of laws against obscenity, blasphemy, lèse majesty, libel, sedition, and so on. Nevertheless, censorship was seriously delegitimized during the 19th century, and especially during the first half of the century. This development is usually attributed to the influence of Enlightenment ideas, which were implemented by liberal politicians in the 19th century. The thesis I would like to test on you today, however, is that graphic satire also played an important, although underestimated and understudied, part in this process. In general, graphic satire became extraordinarily widespread in 19th century Europe. In the beginning of the century, popular caricature shops opened in major cities such as London and Paris. And in the 1920s, satirical magazines began to appear in the European public sphere. Within a few decades, thousands of satirical magazines were printed in France, Germany, England, Holland, Scandinavia, and many other places. Alone in France, more than 300 new satirical magazines appeared during the 19th century, some with print runs comparable to the largest newspapers of the time. Furthermore, graphic satire could also be read by the illiterate lower classes, which were particularly feared by European authorities, not least because they had the strongest motivation to rebel against the established order. As Robert Goldstein has pointed out, the authorities feared that subversive satires could significantly undermine support for the established order and might even lead to revolutionary outbreaks, not least because they were accessible to the most feared elements of the population, the lower classes. Although they were literate, they could still read images, so to speak. Finally, censorship, which was supposed to protect the established order, itself became a major target of graphic satire all over Europe in the early 19th century. While many satirists had tried to circumvent censorship in the 18th century, numerous satirists began to attack censorship in the early 19th century. Thus, an unprecedented number of graphic satires suddenly exposed and ridiculed censorship mechanisms as reactionary, suppressive, pedantic, paternalistic, and much more. To this end, satirists developed a series of recurring symbols, characters, and motives which over time became part of the collective imagination and thus closely associated with censorship among people of all walks of life. Let me give you a few examples. The padlocked jaw became a symbol of the suppression caused by censorship all over Europe. In 1795, it was used in England to criticize the so-called gagging acts against seditious meetings and treason. Thus, here to the left, you see a satire by an unknown artist in which then Prime Minister William Pitt assures John Bull, the personification of England, that he will soon get used to it. To the right, you see a satire from 1819 by George Cruikshank, pointing out that although England was famous for not having prior censorship, there were so many laws restricting free speech that the supposedly freeborn Englishman in effect had his mouth padlocked. The Englishman's skinny and ragged character, his poor family sitting on the ground behind him, and the filled debtor's prison all point to the fact that satirists risked financial ruin if prosecuted for sedition, libel, blasphemy, or the like. The scissors were another frequently recurring symbol of censorship, especially in France, or actually all over Europe. They were exposing the fact that censors often cut out unwelcome parts of images and texts. In 1822, Eugène Delacroix celebrated the partial abolition of censorship in France in a satirical cartoon in which winged scissors rise to the sky, while a devil drives a cart full of censors away from the former headquarters, which already bears a sign saying it's for rent. The identity of the censors is revealed by innuendos. For example, pain de sucre, the sugar leaf with number 2 next to the rising scissors, suggests Marie-Joseph Pain, who was a well-known censor at the time. I can't go through all the details. I'm just focusing on the main symbols here. In 1835, Granville exposed the censors as vain pedants eager to cut out criticism of themselves. The caption to this satire is thus a quote from one of the censors reading, "Oh, that's too much to put us, the censors, in a caricature. These artists need a lesson. Let's cut." On the table, the instrument for cutting, a last scissor, is visible. Thus, in addition to reusing the scissor as a symbol of censorship, Granville, like Delacroix before him, also stages the censors as new prominent characters in satire. In this image, they are depicted with deformed heads and unflattering features, maybe suggesting narrow-mindedness or mental deficiency. The censors were also ridiculed in 1828 when an unknown French artist depicted them as hunters on a horseback, equipped with scissors and accompanied by hounds and vultures hunting a series of escaping letters that form the word literature. In the foreground, a parallel scene is depicting 3 children in walking carts hunting the letters J and ABC. The satire thus exposes not only the censors, but also the disempowering or infantilizing effect of living under censorship. It suggests that censorship turns people into little children who can't stand on their own 2 feet. Thus, the satire also exposes those who accept censorship by holding up a mirror to them. It stages the motive of infantilization caused by censorship. Something similar is the case in a German satire from 1847, in which an unknown artist depicts a monstrous scissor-headed censor, here assisted by a sheep-headed police officer, suggesting that police is stupid. They both walk in a procession led by a blind mole, carrying a flag, showing a crayfish, which is another recurring symbol representing censorship as a backward or a kind of regression. At the top of the flag is yet another symbol which is often associated with censorship, namely a light extinguisher representing obscurantism and counter-enlightenment. At the center of the image, we see the good press, which is also the ironic title of the image, referring to the childlike, infantilized journalists following the censor like children in leading strings, as the accompanying verses say. In the 18th and 19th century, leading strings, or Gängelbänder, as it's called in German, were narrow fabric straps attached to children's clothing, preventing them from straying too far or falling as they learned to walk. Thus, their function was similar to that of the walking carts in the previous satirical image. In other words, the image not only ridicules the censorship and police authorities, but also the good press, that is, the polite and accepting press that acts like little well-behaving school children. European satire thus develops a wide range of symbols, characters, and motives critical of censorship in the first half of the 19th century. Because these symbols, characters, and motives were frequently repeated and distributed to an unprecedented number of people from all classes, they eventually, I would argue, became part of the mainstream imagination. Therefore, I think it's fair to argue that they helped to undermine the legitimacy of censorship and pave the way for its abolition. Because they helped spreading and popularizing Enlightenment values such as liberty, autonomy, and the freedom of expression, they played a crucial, although understudied, part in delegitimizing censorship and turning the human right of freedom, of free expression, into a constitutional right. My thesis is admittedly at odds with the so-called safety wall theory, which is sometimes also talked about in terms of a catharsis theory. In short, this theory claims that people vent their indignation or contempt, or that they let out steam through satire, so they no longer feel the same need to do anything about what is causing the indignation or anger. In short, my counter-argument would be that this may very well be the case in individual or limited cases, but if a sufficient number of people vent their indignation or contempt for a sufficient number of years, then the general atmosphere will eventually change. And once the general atmosphere has changed, it is likely to have historical consequences. Thank you.
Brilliant.